Begin the current Daf Mesech the Succah Daf Lamed Gimel. We begin on the bottom of Lamed Beis Lamed Beis. We continue with the next Mishnah. The theme of the Dal Min that we're discussing. We open up Lulav. Gazel speaking about the Lulav, and now we continue on to the Hadas regarding the myrtle. Ashir corresponds because Zich Necheskel to Entem Davachaim. Appreciate everyone's joining us for today's Daf. Some of these things discussed in today's Daf are different types of Hadas that are valid and invalid. If the top of the Hadas or rubber was clipped off, what we call Nikdam Reishai. Can objects used for mitzvahs be disqualified permanently for use in the mitzvah, what's known as dichui? The status of berries on the hadas, which sometimes we have, like you see on your trees that has these types of berries. What's the halacha? We forget that the hadasim are just like branches like any other tree. What's the halacha with those berries? Binding the four species together, the halacha if tzarech eged or not. Some of the key terms of concepts discussed in today's daf are shem levai, which is if something has a distinct name, not just the generic name, is that change the status of that item. The concept of is the rejection, just like we say by kadshim, that something can be rejected, so too do we say that regarding mitzvahs. Kis adam is the mitzvah when you have a chay and a oif and you slaughter them, mitzvah to cover their blood. Tasa v'lemin asri is, it says in the Torah tasa, that chag sukkah's tasa, you should make it, which means v'lemin asri, it shouldn't be made by default by doing something else. Ezaiv is the hyssop, which is used in many different mitzvahs. In our context, we discussed regarding by the Pesach Mitzrayim, they used it to put the blood on the doorpost. Zekil vanveyu is the pasuk in Az Yashir, that it's a source for a generic halach of hidur, that anytime you have a mitzvah, vanveyu is to beautify it, there should be a beautiful mitzvah. Tikkun mana is the prohibition of fixing something on Shabbos because of makah b'patish. Esenetias is a unique halacha, that halacha Meshem Sinai, that comes in all the way at the end of the daf, that if there's 10 trees in a certain amount of area, Beis, then we say it has more of a lenient halacha regarding the laws of Shemitah. Davashin Meskaven is something that wasn't intended to be done, then Reb Shimon holds his mutter. But if it's psik reishay, if it's what's called inevitable, you're going to cut up the chicken's head, say, I didn't mean to kill it, I just wanted the head. Well, then even Reb Shimon, even though that wasn't intended, would say that's going to be forbidden. So begin the current daf. On Daf Lamed Beis on the Mishnah. The Mishnah says Hadas. Now we continue into the second of the Dal Minim of regarding Hadasim, regarding the myrtles. So again, just like we said regarding Lulav, we're going to say the same thing regarding Hadasim. Because it says in the pasuk again, this L'kachtem Lechem B'Yemarishan, there's these four things, and there's enough eitz avis, which the Gemara will explain refers to the Hadas. So Hadas Hagazel V'Hayavish. If you have a stolen or a dried out Hadas, pasla, it's going to be invalid. And like we said, there's lochem, and then there's yavish, which is because of a lack of hadar. We said this all by lulav. If it's from an asherah tree, or it's from a city it has to be because they did avodah zarah, that the city has to be burnt. Again, puzzle because it doesn't have a shear or requisite measurement, and there's a minimum shear that you have to have for hadasim, so therefore it's going to be puzzle too. Niktim roisha, if the top of it got cut off. Nifritzu olav, if the leaves fell off of the hadas, or if it's berries. There's this type of fruit that grows similar to like a grape on the hadas. If those berries were merubas mi'alav, were actually more than the leaves, pasal is going to be pasal. V'miatan kasher. But if let's say you diminish them, then it's going to be kasher. But ve'ememaitim b'yamtiv. However, one is not allowed to do this on yamtiv. So term of the brisa. That how do we know that what again, like we said, it says in the pasuk, you take pri eitz hadar, kabes tamarim, anaf eitz avos aved nachal. None of them say clearly what that is. Pri eitz hadar is the fruit of the beautiful tree. Kabes tamarim, so that we already said on the previous daf. How do we know that that's referring to lulav? Now we're discussing anaf, the shoot of eitz avos of the tree that's plated, meaning that's telling us that the whole thing is anafim, meaning that you have the tree is covered with leaves by it's being braided and it's laying on the surface of the tree. So how do we know that that is a hadas? Because it means sha'anaf of chayfen eseitza. It's someone that its shoots are covering the wood, the branch. Ve'ezahu, what type of a tree has it that the leaves are covering the tree itself? Havam is a hadas. That's the hadas, which has enough of chayfen eseitza. Like you look in the picture, the leaves cover the branches, giving and it's totally covered. Now, says the Gemara, okay, but how do you know ve'emazesa? Maybe it's referring to the olive tree, which all its leaves are very long and they're also continuous, and because there's so many of them, they also cover the whole entire. You don't see the stem at all. Says the Gemara, yeah, but be'inin avos. There's another terminology here in the pasuk. There's anaf eitz avos. So besides the fact that it's the anaf is covering the eitz, there's also avos. Avos means like plated means say it's like a chain, which means say each one is laying on the other. Veleka, and that you don't have by the olive trees. Although the olive tree, the very big leaves, and they're covering the whole branch, but it's not covering it in like a chain way. It says dulva. Maybe it's referring to the chestnut tree, which is braided. But says the Gemara, yeah, but enough of chayfiness eitzoi veleka. But you need to have that its leaves are going to be totally covering the wood, and by the chestnut, it doesn't have consecutive leaves to cover the whole entire wood. So although it's plated, although it's like chained, but it's not totally covering. So again, it has to have both of these criteria. It has to have that it's consecutive, that it's like plated like a chain, and also that it's covering the whole entire stem, that you don't see any of the wood. That's anaf eitz, that the eitz is covered with anafim, and avos is that it's plated. Says maybe it's hirduf, which is also made like a plated from its leaves, and it covers the stem. So Abaye says no, it can't be. Why not? Because the pasuk says initially, we mentioned this on the previous daf. The ways of Torah are sweet. And you don't have that here by the hirduf, because this hirduf has prickly stems like needles coming out, and it's like thorns. And it's not possible. The Torah would ask you to take a species that has thorns coming out, because that wouldn't be derech dachanayim. That would be obviously painful, and therefore they can't be the hadas that we would ask you to take. They can't be nafetz avos. Rav Mahachi brings another pasuk in Zechariah, ha'emes v'hashol mehavu. The truth and peace you should love, and this hirduf is not truth and not peace, because it's made for a portion of death. It's poisonous, and therefore it can't be that would qualify for what the mitzvah wants you to take. That's not a emes v'hashol mehavu, and therefore it can't be that species. So that's how we know that anaf it's avos refers to the hadassim that we take. Now, we're going to learn a brisa that continues on this theme of avos, that it has to be plated, which again is in chains, like in circles. So kalua kimin kali, it has to be plated like a braid. V'dem l'shalshelas, and it's like a chain. Zehu hadas, this is what we know as the hadas, which this is from the most important halach that everyone's looking for by hadassim, as our Gemara is going to explain. It's got to be like a chain. It's got to be consecutive with the leaves. Rabbi Lezer Yaakov, he says a different source. He's not coming from the word avos, which is telling us like plated. He says that, how do you know that it's the hadassim? Because anaf eitz avos. It's the shoot of the plated tree. Why does it say eitz? Eitz is telling you a tree should tam eitz per yeshava. That the taste of the wood and the taste of the fruit is the same. That's referring to the hadas, where the fruits taste the same as the bark. Tana will learn the brisa. Eitz avos, if it's eitz avos, which is plated, again, which means chained, like we know that it's circular. So kasha, it's kasha. B'she'ein avos, if it's not plated, then pasal is going to be pasal, as the pasuk saying. So it says the Gemara, heichadami avos. What does it mean that it has to be plated? Amar Rabbi Yehuda, he says, v'hu kaimi tlasa, tarfi bekina. This is the famous halacha that we look for when we're buying hadassim, that if you have 3 leaves on the same, Rashi used the word kan, same base, the same row, which they're all coming out of the same bud, so then, as Rashi makes it sound like as if it's coming out of the same place, we look for the same, even if they're different ukets, but as long as on the same line, that you have to have the 3 together in the same spot. That's called mishalashim. That's what we're looking for to make it into avos. Now, if Kahanami says, "Afil trei v'chad," says actually, even as the slower picture shows, even if you have 2 and 1, meaning, let's say you have 2 leaves coming out from the same ukas, from the same part of the stem, and you have 1 leaf, actually, like this picture, we have 1 leaf lower down, and then it rises up, and it's riding on the other 2, even that's going to be good enough to have what's called mishulish, to have the 3 consecutive leaves that cover the stem, to be considered as avos. Now, actually, he actually specifically went to look for that type of a hadas that had 2 together on the same row and 1 a little bit lower that was coming over it, even though for sure 3 from the same spot would definitely be kosher. Why did he specifically look for the 2-on-1 one? Since Rav Kahana said this, that it's kosher, but Dafka wanted, but the Rebbe the Rosh Shiva said this, so Dafka wanted to go ahead and take that one. However, Amalei Mar Bar Meimal Ravashi, as actually the halacha follows like this opinion, he says, Abba, my father, lahu, that one that was what's called 2-on-1, hadas shaitakar, he called it a deranged hadas. Meaning just like someone that's deranged, he doesn't have his affairs organized, he's dysregulated. Here also, this hadas is considered dysregulated because it's not valid as a hadas, because it's not three in the same one. Having one a little bit off is not considered a hadas misholish. Now, related term, I'm learning the brayso. Nashur reiv olav. If let's say most of the leaves fell off, meaning from every single ovis, which has the plated one has three. If most of the leaves fell off, and only the minority of the leaves left, kasher tzimi kasher, as long as you have it being plated. So the Gemara says, how does that make sense? Hagufa kasher. That's an internal contradiction. Amrit nasher olav kasher. You said if most of the leaves fell off, it's going to be kasher, which is how many? How many most leaves falling off? There's 3 on every row. If you're saying most fall off, it means 2 fall off of every single row. And then then you tell me, as long as it's going to remain plated. But keeping the naslu tray, if you tell me 2 out of the 3 fell off, because most fell off, so how are you going to have it being plated? You only have 1 on each row. So Mabai says, interesting case. No, mishkachesla, you could have this as you continue to have but asa mitzrah. So actually, asa mitzrah either means to say that from the word of meitzar, that it grows on the boundaries of the fields. And the reason why is because since it's very open, what's called free range type hadassim, so it's very successful and has incredible growth. Or actually means as mitzrah from the word of Mitzrayim. It's the Egyptian hadas, whichever one. But the kaimesh shiva shiva b'chad kina, they actually have so many leaves on every row. There's actually 7, as this picture illustrates, on every single row. When the majority of the leaves fall off, which is what's the majority of 7 is 4, but partial plus, you're still remaining with 3. You can still have others even if the majority of the leaves fell off. And that's what the Bryce is saying is going to be kosher, even if the majority falls off, because you'll still have others.
You could say that it was the clusters fell off. In other words, you still have 3, but the next set of 3 is missing, and then there's 1, and then there's another one.
Right, so Rashi says, Reiv Olav means of each, 2 of every others is what fell off. Yeah, so Abai says, Shema Minah, what we infer from this is Hayas Mitzrah, that this Egyptian, meaning parenthetically, the Gemara is saying, you just told me that the case that the Brisa would be saying that most of the leaves can fall off and then it's going to be kosher is by the Egyptian myrtle. So obviously, Hayas Mitzrah Kosh Laishana, obviously that the Egyptian myrtle is kosher to be used for hadassim. Says Gemara Pshita, obviously, why would you think not? Says Gemara, I'll tell you why. Because what would you say? It has a secondary name. It's not just called Hadassim, it's called the Egyptian Hadassim. I would say Lemiskash not going to be valid. I have to tell you that no, it is valid. Says why did you say that you're right? Maybe Taka shouldn't be kosher because it's not the classic Hadassim. It has a secondary name, which tells wonders. How could you even think that it would be a problem? That doesn't say anywhere in the Torah Hadassim. But that's really what the Gemara answers. The Gemara says, no, 8 of us are Machman. The Torah doesn't say anything about Hadassim. It says the pleated branch. And that's Mekam as any pleated one, even if it's an Egyptian version, it doesn't make a difference. It doesn't say anywhere. A lot of times when it says Ezaiv, it says, and it has to be something that doesn't have a secondary name. It doesn't say anywhere in the Torah Hadassim. It says Eitzav, and it says Eitzav is going to be valid. Now, continue on the same Torah, but on the Braisam, Yavshu Roiv Olav. If, let's say, we were talking about Roiv Olav a second ago, so let's say most of the leaves of Hadassim that they dried up. V'nishur b'shleishim badei, and this big machlekes Rishonim, a bit Rashi, the way he says it, v'nishur b'shleishim badei, left with 3 stems. Meaning, why we're talking about stems is because it could be they put in a lot of stems. You know, the Rebbe's Hadassim, he has like 20 Hadassim in his Liliv, you know, with the Kashikals, you have everything going on. But if he's left at least with 3 stems that have Olan Lachin, that have with it 3 moist leaves. So from the 20 Hadassim he had, he's left with 3 Hadassim, what we call Badin, stems. Every single stem has 3 moist leaves. The reason why is less than 3 moist leaves is not considered others. The minimum of being plated is at least 1 row of moist leaves. Then it can be plated at least in 1 spot. Then kosher, then it's going to be kosher as hadassim. He says, but those 3 moist leaves have to be on the top of the stems. But if let's say you have one row, which is 3 leaves of moist leaves in the middle, that wouldn't be considered hadar. Hadar is always on the top. So let's say you have you went, you flew somewhere, and who knows what happened. The weather there on the bottom of the plane was extreme heat, and it was all dried out, except on the top you have one row of dry leaves. Says the Gemara, that's going to be kosher as long as you have 3 of these hadassim that have, this is the way Rashi explains it, and the top, as long as you have one row to make it obvious of, because Yavish we know is puzzle. But as long as you have one row that's obvious, that's moist, it's going to be kosher as long as it's on the top, because the top is where we look for, because again, Yavish is the psul of what? Of hadar. And so where hadar we always look for, like by the lulav, we look for the top. The tiyayim is, we always look for the hadar, like by the chaitim of the esrig. Hadar is always more on the top where we're looking. Hashayna zach, Hashayna ezer, Hashayna. So that's where we look, and therefore then it's going to be kosher. Now the Gemara continues with the halach of the Mishnah. We say niktim roisha. If the top of the hadas got chopped off, so then it's going to be pasul. So the Gemara qualifies and says, interesting heter. Tani ula barchina said, let's say niktim roisha. Let's say the top of the hadas got cut off, but also by tomorrow. But in place of it, there's like a berry like there's like just like you find by the leaves of the willows of the aravis. Sometimes on the leaves there's like this like the greenish yellowish fruit, a berry, and the women they use it to dye their kerchiefs. So here also on top of where it was cut off, there's a berry that's on top of the cut off part of the hadas. So kosher. Actually, the hadas is going to be kosher because it's not a chesaron of hadar. The whole reason why being cut off is because it's not hadar. It's going to be hadar because you have a berry, ploop, cherry on the top. It looks nice right now. Now, related to that halacha, the Gemara has the following question. So, Bayi Rabbi Yirmiyah, he says, Niktim Reishay me'erev Yom Tov. What happens if the head was cut off from before Yom Tov? Also by Tamar b'Yom Tov. Now, the berry only developed on Yom Tov, when you already had the whole lulav was tied together already, and the karshakach you have all tied together, and the reason is because this berry could also grow even when it's detached. It doesn't have to grow only because it's like from the sap, whatever it could grow even when it's detached. Ma, what's the halacha? What's the question? What are you asking? I thought if there's a berry on the top, it's okay. It's not a problem. Hadar. I'll tell you what the question is, says the Gemara. Yesh dichu etzel mitzvahs. In other words, do we apply the concept of dicha rejected by mitzvahs, just like we say by karbanas? That if, let's say, the animal was able to be brought as a carbon, then somehow after it was slaughtered, it got rejected. So then you say it remains rejected, and it doesn't come back to be viable again. Say also, since when the top of the hadas got chopped off, it became rejected because it's not hadar anymore, so it cannot come back to be considered valid again, even when the berry comes and takes the place. Because once Yom Tov started, it was already a cheftzah shel mitzvah, it was already a hadas, it was nira, you were able to use it, but then it got cut off, which Taisa discusses. Rashi seems to bring a case of if it's nir v'nitcha or it's ein nir mi'olam, but the point is it was rejected, it couldn't be brought as a hadas, and then when it comes back, then you say, okay, it's already nitcha, oilai, or maybe no. And as Rashi himself points out, at this point the Gemara is not analyzing between if it's what's called dochim mi'ikara, it's originally rejected, or nir v'nitcha, if it was able to be used and then it got rejected. Because when it's niktem me'erev Yom Tov, if the top of the hadas got cut off from before Yom Tov, that's really called loy nir me'olam. It wasn't nir v'nitcha. Nir v'nitcha is worse off. Because if you were eligible and then you get rejected, it's like that's already like real rejection. But if it was never eligible, it's never started. It's like I can't get fired if I never tried. You can't reject me if I didn't apply. So that's the question. Is there halach of dichur like by kodshim? Do we say the same concept by mitzvahs or not? Says the Gemara. What do you mean? B'tifshat leim mohadit nan. Let's prove it from a Mishnah in Masechta Chulin. Mishnah says kisahu. If a person covered the blood of a chaya or a knife, which the halach is when you slaughter an animal, you have to cover the blood. V'dem in this gala. Then the wind comes, takes off all the dirt and all the sand that you put on, and it's v'nisgala, uncovers the blood. Patim l'chasas, you're exempt from covering because you already did your mitzvah of kisadam. But let's say kisu haruach. Let's say the wind covered it, then actually chayav l'chasas. Then you have to still cover the blood. What does that mean? So Amar Rabbi Yochanan ben Rechon, he says, we didn't learn that if the wind covers it, you have to cover it. Only if the wind covered it, and then the wind went and got uncovered again. that's when you have to go ahead and cover it. Let's say it didn't go back to be uncovered. No, you don't have to go ahead and uncover it to cover it again. It's covered. You would be exempt from covering it. Now, in Masechtas we had asked on this halacha that, wait a second. When it subsequently gets uncovered, when the wind had covered it, and then the wind uncovers it. Why you have to go ahead and cover it? Since you were already rejected from performing this mitzvah, because once the wind went and covered the blood, you were rejected from doing the mitzvah. Because just like you said that if it wasn't going to be uncovered, you're going to be exempt from covering it. So you're already rejected from doing the mitzvah. So then you should be rejected forever from doing it, even if it's ultimately subsequently gets uncovered. Because it already was rejected for those moments when it was covered. You should be considered what's called dachay, rejected from doing it. And that Vamra Papi says, so what's called is gishpart. This tells us that ain't dichei mitzvah. Obviously, there's no halach of dichei, because if there was dichei, then you wouldn't be able to go back and perform it again. You're already rejected from doing it. Obviously, from the fact that the Brisa says that you have to do it, is because you're not rejected. So why are you asking over here in our Gemara? You want to declare regarding niktam reit shemer b'yamtiv also b'yamtiv. You want to know the berry really fixes it, but you rejected. Maybe you remain rejected. What do you mean? We have a clear halach of Mara Papa regarding kisei adam that there's no halach of dichei b'mitzvahs. Says the Gemara, did Papa Gufe? This, that Reb Papa was medayik from that brisa, Yomי has an interesting question on that diga Reb Papa, which is like this. Is it that mifshid pashalei? Is it that it was so obvious to the time of that brisa by kisei adam? The ain't dicha, it's a mitzvahs, that no, for sure, there is no halacha of rejection by mitzvahs. And hence, loishno lekula, it wouldn't make, if it's a leniency like the halacha of Rabbi Yirmiyah, that if you say ain't dichoy, then it's going to be kosher, this hadas. And if you do say there's rejection, it's going to be puzzle. And that we're going to even say that there's no dichui of the hadas that got clipped off on the top. And you're going to say it's kosher when the berry comes back. And yeah, it doesn't make a difference if it's a stringency. Like over here by kisei adam, where we obligate you to do kisei adam, because of ein dichui is going to be obligating you of doing a mitzvah. And is that what the case was? This is what the Gemara is questioning. Was it obvious to the Gemara over there, the way that Tana, the way your Papa is being medayik, that when there's Gala Haruach, that then you have to go out and do it again, even though you were dachi for that moment, because it's a mitzvah, whether l'kula or l'chumrah? Or maybe it's not true. Maybe the Tana of that brisa was in doubt. And out of doubt, l'chumrah, we're going to go stringently. We're going to say, okay, we don't know. We don't know if there's dichur or not. And on the tzad that there's no dichur, so then you have to go and do kisei adam. Now they got uncovered because maybe there is no dichur. But l'kula as a leniency, like for example over here regarding the tamara, this date that growing on the top of the sadis of this myrtle, we're not going to say, we're going to say, no, it's invalid because maybe there is dichur. Take your let it stand. That's the question. The reason why we're not resolving the question from over there is that wouldn't tell us definitively that there's ein dichri. That would only tell us because we're in doubt, maybe. And as a stringency, we're going to say ein dichri. But no one said as a leniency, like in our Gemara, it's a leniency to say ein dichri. That you say, yeah, ein dichri. You could use the same others. Look, a berry grew on the top. Yeah, but that's only if you know definitively. And since the Gemara doesn't know that, the Gemara did not resolve the question. But the Gemara says, okay, let's say that this question we have, if there's dichei etzel mitzvahs, in specifically our case here in our Gemara, is a machlokes tanoim. Because the Brisa mentions, although we said in our Mishnah that you're not allowed to go ahead and take off the berries on Yom Tiv, because of tikkun mana, you're fixing something. But let's say, says the Brisa of a velaktan. Let's say someone violated this isser, and he plucked off all the berries of the hadassim, which were more than the leaves, which the Mishnah said that yes, if you diminish the berries, it's going to be kosher. But the Mishnah said you're not do it on Yom Tov because of the Issa Drabana, because it looks like you're fixing a vessel and you're validating it. But if you did violate it and you did diminish the berries, what's the halacha? So pasul, it's going to be pasul that's divrei b'lezer b'reb tzadik. And as the Gemara will explain the reason why he holds it pasul. Say, no, it's going to be kosher. You're right, you're even an isser, but now the fact that it's a kosher hadas, you can use it. Says the Gemara like this: Savrua, the Rabbanan of the Beis HaMedrash, the ones who wanted to say that this is a machlekes of Tanoim, if you hold yesh dichur or ein dichur, they thought to say like this: two variables they presumed. Variable number one is the kuli alma, that everyone, the Rabbanan, Rabbi Elazar Tzadik, they hold lulav ein tzarich eged, that lulav does not need to be bound. What is the chiddush of saying that it doesn't have to be bound? If it doesn't have to be bound, it doesn't have to tie it together, then there's no asiyah, there's no making to say that the reasoning of Rabbi Elazar that where he would say it's pasul, if you went and you picked off the berries on Yom Tov, is because, wait a second, if you have to have eged, it means to say the lulav is in a bundle already. If you had the lulav with the hadassim, and the hadassim had the berries, and it was all bound together, and then when you pick off the berries, you know what you're doing now? You're doing tasav lemon asay, because you didn't make it kosher. No, it was made unkosher. But now indirectly, by taking off the berries, it's retroactively going to be made, and that's not valid. So that would explain Rabbi Elazar in a very different way. We don't want to say that what he's saying. We want to say it's about dichur or not dichur. So the rabbis presumed, again, this is all about their presumption, that everyone agrees that lulav does not have to be bound. Again, because if it have to be bound, then we would explain Rabbi Elazar saying it's possible for a different reason, because of Tazim al-Nasa. No, it doesn't have to be bound. And even if you say that, no, you could say that they hold that you do have to bind it together. Even so, a second variable would tell us, again, why it's not a problem with Tazim al-Nasa. Because again, that's the competing concept of why Rabbi Elazar would say it's problematic, not about because of dichri. No, you lo yalfein on lulav mesukah. The reason is because they agree that you don't learn not the halachas of lulav from the halachas of sukkah. Where do we find this halacha of tasa lemnasa? It's a pasuk by the mitzvah of sukkah. The chsiv ba tasa. It says chag sukkah is tasa l'chashavas yamim, which that teaches you below min asa, and it can be made indirectly made, because by lulav it doesn't say tasa. So even if you would say lulav has to be bound together, but no one says there's a psul of tasa lemnasa by lulav, you could indirectly make a lulav. It's only by sukkah that says not allowed. So either way, if you hold either one of these ideas, either that lulav doesn't need to be bound, or even if it does, that you don't know lulav from sukkah, you cannot say that the reason Rabbi Elazar says it's possible if you went and plucked off the berries and Yom Tov is because tasa lemnasa. So my love, so what is it? So what are we left with? Why would Rabbi Elazar then say it's problematic if you violated and you picked off the berries? Obviously, obviously they're disagreeing about the following idea. Now the only invalidation you become left with is because of the concept of dichur. The man the apostle Rabbi Elazar B'Tzadik, who says it's problematic, it's possible because yesh dichur, it's a mitzvah. We say that there is considered halacha of rejection by mitzvahs, and that is since when you binded it together, you did it problematically, and that is it was called a lulav of a mitzvah at a time when it's being rejected, because when you made the lulav, when Yom Tov is starting, it had berries on it. So at that point it was rejected, so that remains rejected forever. Now, although it really was never what's called nir v'nitcha, was never eligible and then got rejected, because it always had the berries when you made it into lulav, but still, dichim mikara it is. It's initially rejected because it always had berries on it. Now Rashi just wonders, why do we have to say this machlokes regarding that you diminished the berries on Yom Tov? If it's about that you made it into a lulav when you binded it together, had the berries, so it's dacha, it's rejected. Why does it have to be that you took it off on Yom Tov? So Rashi says either because we presume that if it's being done on Yom Tov, it's after that you already binded it together in the lulav, because on Yom Tov you now bind the lulav together. So that's why we're saying that you took off the berries on Yom Tov, because we needed to really be after you made it into a binding, you tied them together. Because when you tied them together, then you're making into the chefetz mitzvah. That's called okay. And what type of mitzvah is this? Oh, this is rejected. You can't use it as berries. Oh, so that's where we see that he holds yesh dichet mitzvahs. Now, what? No, because it's kasher. It would be tying a knot. You're not allowed to knot something. We're going to talk later about if there's other ways of tying it, but that's classically that you're tying it, so that would be a problem of kosher. Now, and even Rashi says, and even if you don't really, if you hold like the mandama that you don't have to tie it together, you still would say that it's talking about that you took off the berries in Yom Tov. Because if Yom Tov didn't start yet, then really, it's not really the time of the mitzvah yet. So you can't call it a mitzvah that was rejected, because it's rejected, when it was on the tree, it was also rejected. When did it become rejected? When Yom Tov starts. So therefore, that's why it has to be that you took off the berries on Yom Tov. But Al Kapanim, Rabbi Elazar B'Tzadik holds that it's possible, because yes, there's halacha of rejection by mitzvahs. The one who holds it is kosher, holds that mitzvahs. You don't say dicha by mitzvahs. You only say by things of sanctity, like karbanas. So that's why the Gemara wanted to say that this is their machlokes. The machlokes is if there's dicha mitzvahs or not. However, as classic Talmudic style says, loy, no. The two variables that we had explained that we presume that each one agreed to explain, there's nothing left for them to disagree about besides the halach of dicha, is actually the two other possible explanations that you could say for this machlekes. No, the kulam aloyim yesh dicha, everyone agrees you don't say rejection by the laws of mitzvahs. And the reason why Rabbi Elazar B'Tzadik holds it possible is actually because of tasav aloyim asay. And the reason is because he holds that a lulav has to be tied together, and therefore it applies a concept of making a lulav. You don't have to tie it together. There's no making. You're not doing anything. It's already made. Hashem made it already. But if you have to tie it together, you're making it into the Chetz Mitzvah. Oh, there's a way of how you're supposed to make it. Rather, the machlekes is regarding if you learn the laws of lulav from Sukkah, as the Gemara explains. Marsa, Rabbi Shloimy holds Yafinan, you learn that lulav from Sukkah through a binyan of lulav misukah. So, in other words, since this one has to make, this one also has to make, meaning both have to be made. The sukkah you have to make, and the lulav you also have to make because he holds the lulav has to be bound together. So just like by sukkah, the Torah is telling you it cannot be mina asa, it cannot be indirectly made. Here also cannot be indirectly made, and therefore that's why it's going to be possible. Not because of dicha, not because of rejection. No halach of dicha says no. If it comes back viable, of course you could. But here it's a different problem. It's because of tasav leman asli. And therefore it could be tasav leman asli. That's one approach. Or if you want, you could say a second approach. If you hold that lulav has to be bound together, has to be tied, meaning there is an asiyah, there's a making of the lulav. So the kul almi yafin lulav mesukah. You're right. Everyone would learn that lulav mesukah, and it would be considered a problem of tasav na asir. But here the machlekes says, does a lulav have to be tied together or not? Again, those are two variables. Do we learn that lulav mesukah, and does lulav need to be bound? And either one of those will reject the proof we wanted to show that the machlekes is regarding dicha or ein dicha. No, we could say everyone holds ein dicha. The problem could be a different psul. It could either be a problem of tasawam na'asri or a related variable if lulav has to be bound together or not. Because if you did, then everyone would agree it would be a problem. Because the eged is what the asiyah is to say it's tasa, and that you learn that from sukkah b'leib na'asri, which is ubeplukted on tanai. The machlekes that we're saying for Rabbi Tzaddik and the Chacham is the machlekes the following tanaim if you need to have lulav being bound or not. Kind of like learn the brisa. The Tanakama says lulav bein agud bein she'ein agud kosher. Whether it's tied together or it's not tied together, it's going to be kosher. That's like the Chachamim. Yehuda says no, agud kosher. If it's bound together, it's kosher. She'ein agud pasuk, not bound together, it's pasuk. That would be like Rabbi Tzaddik. And therefore, again, those are two different viable options of explaining the machlekes tanoim, not about dachi. Now it says my time Yehuda. So what actually is the reason Rabbi Yehuda? Why, if you don't bind together the lulav, is it going to be possible? Because he has a gzera shava. Yalaf lekicha lekicha magudis ezav. We learn now from the bundle of hyssop that was used in Pesach Mitzrayim to the laws of the lulav. Because ksevach, it says of him, it said you take for yourself on the first day, kabas tomorrow, manas, it's the pasuk of the Dal Minim. It says the word lekachtam. Like ksevach says over there by Pesach Mitzrayim, a pasuk in Shema is ulekacht magudis ezav. You should take for yourself a bundle of hyssop. Both pasuk saying lekachtam. So malahal nagudis, just like over there by the hyssop, was a bundle of hyssop. Avkana Guda also over here has to be a bundle, and that's how he knows that it has to be binded together. But Rabbanan, unless they don't have such a Messiah, such a Gzeir Shava, and therefore that's why they don't hold that it has to be tied together. One thing again, we don't have a raya that Rabbi Tzaddik is talking about halacha of dicha b'mitzvahs, and that's why we didn't resolve our question when we had asked before. We remained with a takeaway. We don't know if there's dicha b'mitzvahs or not. Now it says the Gemara, one last point, Mantan lo detan Rabbanan. So who's the Tan of the following brisa that says as follows? Lulav, it says lulav is mitzvah la'agda. It's a mitzvah to go ahead and bind it together. Vim la'agda, and if you don't bind it together, kasher is going to be kasher. Says Gemara, Samani, who's this Tan? It doesn't make sense. If it's Rabbi Yehuda, so kila agda my kasher. If you don't bind together, why is it kasher? He holds it's going to be puzzle. And Rabbanan, my mitzvah, but according to Rabbanan, what type of mitzvah? They don't have such a gzeir shavah, so why would it be a mitzvah of tying it together? Says the Gemara, Rabbanan. Truth is Rabbanan. The mitzvah is for a secondary, more generic reason of zekil manveya. Manveya means of nava, of beautiful. You're supposed to beautify yourself in front of Hashem with the different mitzvahs. And the generic halacha of hidur mitzvah is the reason why you would tie it together. And therefore, of course, if you don't do it, of course, you're going to be yetzer. But that's why initially one should do it, and therefore it's going like the Chachamim and not like Rabbi Yehuda. Now, the next halacha the Mishnah said that if let's say you had too many berries, so we said that it's going to be puzzle, and we said that you're not supposed to go ahead and diminish them on Yom Tov. Now, Amar Rav Chizni says, this thing that I'm about to say, our great teacher, that of Rav, he said this, and Hashem should help him. He said, he said this halacha of the berries, if there's more berries than leaves, it's going to be a problem. He said it's only if it's in one place, meaning all the berries are concentrated in one area. But there's still more than all the leaves in the whole myrtle branch, in the whole hadas. That's if it's in one place. But if it's in 2-3 different places, then even if you have more berries than leaves, as long as it's not concentrated in one place, it's going to be kosher. So on that, Amalei Rava says, wait a second, as we continue to Talmud Beis, how could you say that? Shnayim Shleishim Mekayim have a menumar. To the contrary, and that's what Tais discusses, should the gears to be adirabba, that if you have it in 2-3 different places, it's actually called spotted, upasul. That should be definitely pasul, because that's not hard, that's not beautiful, because the berries are black and the leaves are green, and that's spotted, and it doesn't have a harmonious look when you have black berries all throughout this green leaves. So Ella rather says, Gemara, you're right. If we had said this halacha hachim, I actually learned differently. The Mishnah said, if you have more berries than leaves, it's going to be pasul. On that, Rav Chizdi says, this, I think, our following teaching, our great teacher Rav said, and Hashem should help him. We only said this, that it's going to be pasul if the berries are black, where they started to dry up already and become black, where in the beginning they were actually greenish. But let's say the berries are green, which is the same color as the leaves, then it's the same species as the hadas. The appearance is the same as the leaves, so it doesn't look spotted. And then for kosher, it's going to be kosher. It doesn't have this weird type of look. Now, I'm going to papa, he says adumais, when they're red, keshcheris damin, that's like black. In other words, because it's not a type of greenish, and that's actually a black type of color. Because actually, when red dries up a little bit more, it's actually going to be black. So red is just as bad as black, and that actually would also be invalid. Because Amar B'Chanina, he said regarding the halachas of dam nida, of menstrual blood, hay dam shachar, when a woman has black blood, adam who it's really considered red, and therefore problematic as dam nida, el shalaka, it's just because it turned darker. And therefore, it's actually tummy, as the Mishnah teaches in Niddav Yud Testament Alf. There's 5 types of blood that are tummy by Isha. It says red and black, and because black is really the same as red, and therefore when we have these red berries, the same as black berries, and therefore it's going to be problematic, unlike the green berries, which we said are going to be okay. Then we said in the Mishnah that again, you're not supposed to be ma'it the berries on Yom Tiv, but if a person was ma'it it, so then it's going to be kosher. Now, so the Gemara wonders, the matinu emas, when exactly are you diminishing these berries? As the Gemara explains, if it's before you went and you tied it together with the lulav, pshita. Obviously, why would it be possible? There's no tastablem in the asa over here, because when you went and tied it together, it was done already with the berries off. And there's no halach of dicha being rejected, because you never called it yet a mitzvah, which is only when you bind it together to call it rejected. So, of course, if you took off the berries before and it would be kosher, why do you even have to tell me that? Ella rather says, no, we're talking about lebasa de la'agde. We're talking about after you already binded it together with the lulav, then afterwards you went and you took off the berries. And that's what the Tana is coming to tell us, that we don't learn out the halachas of lulav from sukkah, and therefore it's not going to be invalidated, although it's really mina asay, because you made it wrong, and then when you take off the berries, then it's secondarily made kosher. And that we're saying that wouldn't be a problem. The problem is, even if, let's say, you don't hold tasav lemon asay, but dichu mi'ikaruhu, but this is initially rejected. In other words, because of dichui, we should have invalidated, because it was initially made when you were binding it together as a hoshana psula, as an invalid hadas. And therefore, says the Gemara, from the fact that you're saying it would be kosher if you took off the berries after you binded it with the lulav, tiv shemino, we should resolve from this point that dichi mikar have a dichi. That initial rejection is not considered rejection. And at least we should have resolved at least half the question we asked on Amud Aleph. We wanted to know is the halacha of dicha b'mitzvahs, or there's no dichui. At least resolve from this halacha, the Mishnah, the dicha meikar, when it's initially rejected, we don't say that it remains rejected, and it's only considered rejected if it was near b'yamtiv and then became rejected. Like let's say you had a kosher hadas and then the top got chopped off and then the berry grew. That would be called nira v'nitcha. That would remain nitcha even when it's chayz v'nira. But here where it's rejected from before yamtiv, this is considered dicha meikara, and at least that you should prove from the case of that, because you're telling me it can't be from before you bind it, because what would be the chiddush? Of course, it's after you bind it and you took off the berries, you're saying it's kosher. Okay, that's dicha meikara, and still you say it's kosher. At least prove that. So the Gemara says, no, lo'ilam basa da agde. We're talking about where you took off the berries here after you had bind it together with the lulav. But the Ksaver, this Tana of our Mishnah holds, Eged hazmana ba'amahu. When you're tying it together, that's just a preparation. Vazmana ba'amalav klumhu. And preparation is nothing. Meaning, the fact that you tied it together is not calling it a name that it should take effect and that, it's like a lulav puzzle that it should be rejected. No, it's nothing. So therefore, it's not even considered dicha mi'ikara. until Yom Tov starts, and then it would still be pasul. Oh, it started at the time of the mitzvah, and it's not fit, then it would be called dachay. But before Yom Tov, that's not considered dachay, and therefore there's no raya, even to dicha meikar, which Tosfos has all arichis explaining what cases, 3 levels of what type of cases of dicha, and how that applies. But akapan, there's no raya, even for dicha meikara, for the halacha as it relates to dicha by mitzvahs. Now, but then the Mishnah continued and said, the imamaitim b'Yom Tov. So he said, like we said before, that you're not allowed to, we say if you diminish it's going to be kasha, but you're not supposed to take over the berries on Yom Tov. Now the inference obviously is ha'ava v'laktan, but let's say you violated and you did take off the berries on Yom Tov. What would the halacha be? It's saying you're not supposed to, but it sounds like if you did, kasher would be kasher, even though obviously you already had the lulav bind it together with adasim from before Yom Tov, because you're not allowed to bind it, you're not allowed to tie it on Yom Tov. So says the Gemara, wait a second. The ashra emas. When exactly did these berries become black? Because as we pointed out before, if the berries are green, it's not absul because it looks the same color as the hadassim. So when did it turn black? If you say they became black from before Yom Tov, well, that's dacha meikaru. That's considered initially rejected because when the time came for the mitzvah, when Yom Tov started, it wasn't fit because it was already black berries from before Yom Tov. So that's considered dacha meikaru. So at least at least prove that initial rejection is not considered rejection because you're saying that it was black berries before Yom Tov, which never fit. If you take it over on Yom Tov, you see it's going to be kosher. Says the Gemara, elalav. Rather, isn't it telling us the ashcha Yom Tov that it became black on Yom Tov? That would be considered nira b'Yom Tov, and then nitcha when it became black. So wait, nir v'nitchahu. So then that's something that's visible and then rejected. Then that's even a bigger chiddush. Then it's even saying it was visible and then rejected. That then you could even come back and be valid again. To which the Gemara says, no, you're right. That we're not going to say so far that it became black on Yom Tov, which that would be nearer when Yom Tov started. Then nitcha, and when you take it off, chayziv and nira. No, the truth is we're talking about where the berries were black from before Yom Tov. That's dach meikar. That means it was never valid because it was always black berries, which is a problem for the hadas. And there was dacha mikar because it's not hadar. It was always rejected. Do I have a dacha where it's not considered as rejection, and therefore you're right. We could resolve at least half of our question we had asked Naman Aleph that's not going to be considered as rejection. But to say it was valid, they rejected, then to go back and be valid again, like tifshet, that we're not going to prove. In other words, like Rashi explains, he says most definitely dacha mikara is definitely better than nir v'nitcha. Because if it was never valid to the mitzvah ever until now, it's only right now that it's eligible. So it's like a carbon that was just sanctified right now, and just in the beginning it was mechuzas man, which is like not 8 days old yet. But if it was valid for the mitzvah and then rejected, well, that is more of rejection. And even think of it socially, rejection is only if you were able to. And they didn't pick you, but I was never here, so I wasn't rejected. So so that's the same idea. So therefore, we resolved half the question. We do see that regarding mitzvahs, that for sure we're not going to say dacha mi'ikara havadacha. The question is, but regarding nir v'nitcha, that we have no raya if by mitzvahs you would say chayz v'nira or not. Now, turn more in the brayso, continue on this theme. We said in the Mishnah, "Emaitim Yom Tov." Now, I'll diminish the berries on Yom Tov. Now, they said, "Memaitin." He says, "No, you could take off the berries on Yom Tov." Says the Gemara, which is a halacha we're presuming up until this point. How can you say such a thing? You're fixing a vessel on Yom Tov because this hadis was pasul, and now by taking off the berries, you're making it kosher. How could you fix something? It's makar b'patish. Some of Ashi says, I'll tell you how. Kugoyin shalokdan, we're talking about with the person who's picking off these berries from the dasim, it's with the intention of lachil, of eating them. He's not doing it to make a kasher. He wants to eat the berries. So therefore, there's no violation. And because Rabbi Shimon, who he's the one who said this halacha that you could take it off, so the kavua, who's his father? His father is Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Shimon, his father Rabbi Shimon. The moment that he says, Dava Shem Eskav, and something that's unintended, I'm not intending to make this into a vessel, it's mutter, permitted. That's how you can take off the berries, because you want to eat it. Says the Gemara, how could you say such a thing? But they both say, Rabbi Shimon, he agrees what's called b'psik reishe v'lo yamas. In other words, let's say someone says, I want to cut off the head of this animal on Shabbos. I don't want it to die. I just want the head. Since it's not possible, what's called inevitable, it's not going to die, even Rabbi Shimon agrees that that's considered like you're intending to do that. When do we say Dava Shein Meskav and something is unintended, even though malach is going to happen, it's going to be permitted according to Rabbi Shimon? That's where it's possible it's not going to be a violation. For example, let's say someone's dragging a bed or a chair or a bench on the ground. As long as he's not intending to make a ditch, which would be a problem by Chayrish, Rabbi Shimon holds that's okay because you're not intending to do it. So although you might be concerned it might make a ditch, but you're not intending to do that. And it's possible also to drag the chair without making a ditch. So even if he's going to make the ditch, it's even though it's a malacha gemura, he's not going to hold you chayiv. But it's inevitable it's going to happen. Obviously he agrees that don't tell me you didn't intend that to happen. You know that's going to happen. Okay, that's inevitable. You chop off the animal's head. Of course it's going to die. Oh, I didn't care for it to die. But you're doing that. You know that you're going to do that. So the problem is, this case is psik v'lo yamas. I'm only intending to eat the berries. But you know that you're inevitably making this into a kosher hadas that you need for your lulav. So how could you say that you will be made the berries on Yom Tov? Says Gemara, no hachmai skim. We're talking about over here the isla yeshana achrita. He has other hadassim. He doesn't need this hadas. So therefore, that's not considered tikkun kli because he doesn't need it to make it kosher. So therefore, now it's not really similar to psik reisha because over there, inevitably, you're taking the animal's life. But here, there is no tikkun mana. I'm not fixing anything. Taking off berries is not really fixing anything. It's only because you need it for the hadas that's considered fixing it. But if I don't need it because I have other hadassim, that's not considered as tikkun mana. So he says a little bit differently. He says it's because of malacha shein tzricha legufa. But again, if he didn't have any other ones, then that'd be considered making it into a vessel because he needs it. So even though he's not intending, it would be also, that would be psik reisha v'lo yamas. Now, term of the brayso, huter agdai. If let's say the bundle gets untied of the lulav b'yom tov and yom tov, so halacha is agdai. You could tie it. You could by wrapping it. You just wrap the tie around it, and you stick the end of, like we take the lulav branches, the lulav leaves. So you take it and you just wrap it around, and then you stick the head of it inside what you tied it around. Kagud shel yarek, like the way they tie the bundles of vegetables. Meaning they don't tie the two ends when they tie the vegetables together like all other knots, which would be a kesher shel kayama, a bona fide knot, which is one of the lamates malachas. And this is meant to remain like this because no one's really thinking about undoing the bundle of the lulav. So it would be problematic as kosher. So says the brayso, if the aguda comes off on Yom Tiv, what you got to do is tie it around, and then instead of knotting it, the edges, just stick it in to what you did to wrap around the lulav. Says Gemara Vamai, why are you pushing to say such an interesting way that you should tie it the way you do vegetables? Make a bow. How do we tie our shoes on Shabbos? We make a bow. So that's better. You're not going to have any malacha because a bow is not a knot. So why do you have to make this thing of wrapping around, sticking it inside? Just make a bow. Says the Gemara, no, Haman Hudzatan this Bryce is Rabbi Hudahi. The Amar that he says in Masechta Shabbos Kafir Gimel and Aleph, Aniva, a bow is Kashira Mal Yasahi. He holds that's considered as a bona fide knot. Like a Bryce teaches, if let's say you have the rope of a bucket that got torn, so the Tanakama says, okay, don't knot it, just tie a bow. Buddha says no. He says wrap it around and like stick it in like the way we're saying over here by the lulav, as long as you don't make a bow. Because a bow he holds is just like tying a knot. Says Gemara, wait a second. If the time of the price of Yehuda, Eged Mal Yasa boy. What do you mean? He holds that you have to make a bona fide knot, as we taught a previous brayso. He said that if you don't make an igud, it's going to be puzzle. Because he learned out Gzeir Shavah from Agudas Ezayv. So this is not considered igud if you just tie it around, you stick it in, because that's not a bona fide knotting. So the Gemara says, you're right. This brayso is not really Rabbi Yehuda. He holds Rabbi Yehuda in one element, that he holds that a bow is considered knotting, like malacha for Shabbos and Yom Tov. But he disagrees with him on one area regarding lulav, that you don't need to have eged. So Rashi says what you hear from this sugi is that you need by a lulav a bona fide knot to knot together the two ends of what you're tying it with, and whoever ties it like a bundle of vegetables, it's not considered as an eged. And even Rabbanan who disagree with you, then they hold that a lulav doesn't even need eged, it's going to be kosher, but still we said in Amanaf there's a mitzvah to tie it, like we learned from Zekel Van Beyu. So Rashi says you have to really tie it, and it's not enough just to tie it around. Continuing the halacha, the next Mishnah, which we'll end over here. Thank you to Anita for hosting us.